My name is Lauren Mitchell. I am 34 years old, and last Sunday, my brother showed me exactly how far he would go just because I finally told him the word, no. Before I tell you about the absolute chaos that unfolded when I decided to stop being the family doormat, let me know where you guys are watching from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. We were in my parents' backyard in Phoenix. It was one of those scorching Arizona afternoons where the heat just radiates off the concrete, turning the air into a shimmering haze. It was about 102 degrees, but my dad insisted on grilling. The smell of lighter fluid and charring hamburger meat hung heavy in the air. I was sitting at the glass patio table, trying to find a patch of shade under the umbrella. My laptop was open. It wasn't just browsing. I was in the middle of a massive launch for a client. I run a digital marketing agency, and weekends don't really exist when you own your own business. I was formatting a final campaign report that was due first thing Monday morning. It was months of data, strategy, and revenue projections. My entire livelihood was on that screen. The rest of the family was scattered around. Mom was fussing over the potato salad, trying to keep the mayonnaise from turning in the heat. Dad was by the grill, nursing a beer, wiping sweat from his forehead with a rag that looked like it had been in the garage since 1995. And then there was Brian. My brother Brian is 2 years older than me. He's 36. He was lounging on one of the pool chairs, feet up, scrolling through his phone with a boredom that seemed almost practiced. He was wearing brand new sunglasses, Oakley's I think, that I knew for a fact he couldn't afford. He stood up, stretched like a cat, and walked over to the patio table where I was working. He didn't pull up a chair. He just loomed over me, casting a shadow on my screen. He took a sip of his beer, an expensive craft IPA he'd fished out of the cooler I brought, and gave me this lazy, half-cocked smirk. "So, Lo," he said, using the nickname I hated. "You think about what I asked you on Thursday?" I didn't look up from the spreadsheet. I was trying to fix a pivot table that wasn't calculating right. "I told you on Thursday, Brian. The answer is no." He chuckled. It wasn't a nice sound. It was dry and dismissive. "Come on. You didn't even listen to the pitch properly. It's not just an idea, Lauren. It's a guaranteed return. Crypto is bouncing back. I just need the buy-in capital. 10 grand. That's it. I double it in 3 weeks and pay you back with interest. Better rates than the bank." I finally stopped typing and looked up at him. He looked so relaxed, so entitled. He had this way of standing, weight on one hip, chin up, that screamed unearned confidence. "Brian," I said, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't cause a scene, "I am not lending you $10,000 for crypto. I am not lending you $10,000 for anything. I'm done." "Lending," he mocked, making air quotes with his free hand. "You act like I'm some stranger. I'm your brother. Family helps family. Besides, look at you." He gestured vaguely at my laptop, then at my car in the driveway. "You're raking it in. What's 10 grand to you? A tax write-off." "It's my salary," I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "And it wasn't just the weather. It's the money I work for. And you still owe me $3,000 for that e-commerce dropshipping thing from last year that never happened." Brian's face changed. The smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine irritation. His jaw tightened. He set his beer down on the table a little too hard. The glass clinked dangerously close to my trackpad. "You really won't lend me 10 grand? He asked, his voice flat. He sounded like it was the most normal request in the world, like asking for a napkin. "No," I said firmly. "I won't." I turned my attention back to the screen, signaling the conversation was over. I typed a sentence. I didn't even see him move. 1 second, I was looking at my quarterly projections. The next, a large hand clamped onto the top corner of my MacBook. I gasped, reaching out, but he was faster. He didn't just shove it. He picked it up with one hand, swung his arm back like he was throwing a frisbee, and let it fly. Time seemed to slow down. I watched my silver laptop, my business, my client campaigns, months of sleepless nights, arc through the hot air. spun once, the screen still glowing, before it hit the water. Splash. The sound was sickening. It was louder than anyone's reaction. It punched through the humid air. The water erupted, and then the machine sank like a stone, the blue light of the screen flickering once under the chlorinated water before going black. The backyard went dead silent. The sizzling of the burgers on the grill was the only sound. My brain couldn't process it. I sat there, hands hovering over a keyboard that was no longer there, staring at the ripples expanding in the pool. Brian stood there, dusting his hands off on his shorts. He laughed, a short, cruel bark of a laugh. "Oops," he sneered, looking right at me. "Guess that's what happens when you don't help family. Maybe next time you won't be so stingy." I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the concrete. I was shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it felt cold. I looked around the yard. I waited for someone to shout. I waited for my mom to drop her spoon. I waited for my dad to run over and grab Brian by the collar. Instead, my dad just turned from the grill. He looked at the pool, then at me and shrugged. "Well," Dad said, flipping a burger, "that's the price you pay for shutting out your own brother, Lauren. You know he's got a temper. You shouldn't have provoked him." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Provoked him?" I whispered. "He destroyed my property because I wouldn't give him money." "It's just a computer," Mom chimed in, her voice anxious, but not for me. She was looking at Brian, checking to see if he was upset. "Don't make a scene, Lauren. We're having a nice family dinner. Just dry it out. I'm sure it's fine. No one asked if I was okay. No one asked about the data. No one asked about the cost." I looked at Brian. He was back in his chair, putting his sunglasses back on, looking satisfied. He thought he had taught me a lesson. He thought this was a power move that would put me back in my place, the little sister who writes the checks. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't give them the dramatic meltdown they were expecting so they could call me hysterical later. I walked to the edge of the pool. I stepped onto the first step, soaking my sandals, and reached down into the cold water. I grabbed the sleek metal casing of my dead laptop and pulled it out. Water poured from the ports, dripping onto the concrete like it was bleeding out. I held it for a second, feeling the weight of it. Then I looked at Brian. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the kind of smile that happens when you realize you have absolutely nothing left to lose. "You're right," I said softly. "About what?" Brian scoffed, cracking his knuckles. "That this is the price," I said. I didn't argue. I didn't say goodbye. I walked past the table, grabbed my car keys, and walked out the side gate. "Lauren, the burgers are almost done," Mom called after me. I kept walking. I got into my car, tossed the waterlogged laptop onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. As I pulled away from the house I had grown up in, I felt something snap inside me. But it wasn't a break. It was a release. That night, alone in my townhouse, I made a few quiet decisions. At 6 a.m. the next morning, when my phone wouldn't stop lighting up with my brother's name, that was the moment I knew he finally understood what it really means to lose something. To understand why I didn't turn the car around and ram it through the fence, you have to understand the history here. This wasn't just about a laptop. If it had been an accident, I would have been upset, sure, but I wouldn't have gone nuclear. This was about the pattern. Growing up, I was always the kid who kept her head down. I did everything right. I stayed out of trouble, I got the straight A's, I went to Arizona State on a partial scholarship for marketing, and I built a career that actually paid the bills. I worked nights, I took freelance gigs on weekends, and by the time I was 29, I had left my agency job to start my own digital marketing business. It wasn't easy. There were months where I lived on ramen and panic attacks, wondering if I could make rent. But I built it. I bought a small townhouse in Phoenix, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I paid off my student loans. For the first time, I felt like my life belonged to me. Brian was the opposite. If you ask my parents, Brian is a free spirit. He's the visionary. In reality, Brian is a leech. He dropped out of community college after a year because the professors didn't get his vibe. He bounced from bartending to personal training to helping a friend with a clothing brand that consisted of 3 t-shirts and an Instagram account. Then he decided he was going to be a full-time creator. In reality, that meant he lived in my parents' house, or in the little condo my dad transferred into my name for tax reasons, and played video games while waiting for his big break. And he always seemed to need just a little more help to get things off the ground. When I started making real money, when I landed my first 6-figure contract, it was like a dinner bell rang for my family. Suddenly, I wasn't just Lauren, the daughter they occasionally forgot to call on her birthday. I was the safety net. Started small. Like when my mom called me, whispering, "Your brother's phone got shut off again. He needs it for his job interviews. Can you just add him to your plan? It'll be easier if it's all under your name." So I did. I added him. Then my Aunt Linda's line got added too, because the family plan was cheaper per line if there were more people. Of course, I was the one paying the whole bill every month. It was $240 a month I never saw again. Then came the subscriptions. Brian needed Netflix for cultural research. He needed my Amazon Prime because shipping fees were a scam. He needed my Canva Pro account to design his logos. He needed HBO Max, Spotify, Hulu. "I'll pay you back when my shop blows up," he'd say. I gave him my logins. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. It's just $20 here, $15 there. But it adds up. The bigger stuff came later. 2 years ago, Brian wanted a car. His old sedan had finally died, mostly because he never changed the oil. He couldn't get approved for a loan on his own because his credit score was somewhere in the basement. So Dad called me. He used his disappointed but hopeful father voice. "Lauren, honey, this is a chance to invest in your brother's future. He needs transportation to get to these networking events. If he can't drive, he can't work." He asked me to co-sign on a loan for a used Jeep Cherokee. Not a cheap car. A Jeep. Because Brian needed to maintain an image. I hesitated. I knew deep down this was a bad idea. But Dad laid it on thick. "You're doing so well, honey. Brian just needs a little boost. Don't you want to see him succeed?" I ended up not just co-signing, but making the down payment. And for the last year, I've been quietly covering most of the monthly payments because Brian always had an excuse. Client didn't pay me, or rent was high this month, or I had to buy inventory. Then there was the condo in Tempe. On paper, it's mine. My parents transferred it to my name years ago to get a tax break, and because, in my dad's words, "You're the responsible one, Lauren. We trust you with the asset." Brian moved in temporarily 3 years ago. He was supposed to stay for 3 months until he got on his feet. 3 years later, he was still there. He didn't pay rent. He didn't pay utilities. He treated the place like a frat house. I paid the HOA fees. I paid the property taxes. I paid the plumber when he flushed paper towels down the toilet. And on top of that, there were the loans that were never really loans. $4,000 for inventory for a sneaker resale business that failed in 2 months. $2,000 for a high-end camera to film his content. A couple hundred here and there for groceries, for gas, for emergency bills. Every time it came with the same promise. "I'll pay you back as soon as I start making real money." He never did. Not a cent. And every time I tried to pull back, every time I tried to set a boundary, my parents would swarm me. "He's your brother, Lauren." Mom would say, tears welling up. "You know he struggles with anxiety. Money stresses him out. You understand finances, he doesn't. Family helps family." So, when Brian threw my laptop into the pool, it wasn't just about a ruined machine. It was the symbolism of it. Here was the tool I used to generate the money that paid for his car, his roof, his food, his entertainment. The machine that represented every hour of overtime I'd worked, every sacrifice I'd made. And he drowned it because I refused to give him more. And my father, the man who taught me to work hard, shrugged and said it was my fault. That splash was the sound of me finally waking up. Because once you realize the people you love see you as a wallet first and a person second, how do you ever go back to normal? I drove home in complete silence. No music, no podcast. Just the sound of my own breathing and the faint hum of the highway tires. My mind was racing, but it wasn't chaotic. It was terrifyingly clear. I walked into my townhouse. I didn't turn on the lights. I dropped my keys in the bowl by the door. I took the dead, dripping laptop and set it on the kitchen counter on top of a towel, like a body being laid out. For a few minutes, I just stared at it. I felt a wave of grief so heavy I almost doubled over. If I let myself feel everything right then, the betrayal, the hurt, the loneliness, I knew I'd either start screaming and never stop, or I'd curl up on the floor and shut down. So instead, I did the one thing I've always been good at. The thing that made me successful while Brian was still playing pretend. I went into my office, sat down at my backup desktop, and I treated my entire life like a client project. I pulled up a blank document. The cursor blinked at me, a steady, rhythmic pulse. I typed one line at the top. What Brian gets because of me. Then I started listing. I didn't do it out of anger. I did it with the cold precision of a forensic accountant. I needed to see the full scope of the infection before I could cut it out. Phone plan, Brian, Mom, Dad, Aunt Linda. All under my name. All on my bill. Total, $240 per month. Streaming accounts, Netflix, Premium Ultra HD because Brian wanted the quality, Hulu Live TV, so Dad could watch sports, HBO Max, Spotify Family Plan, Amazon Prime. All logged in on Brian's TV, his phone, his tablet. Shopping. I checked my Amazon order history. Pages of craft supplies, protein powder, weird gadgets, and random impulse buys shipped to the Tempe address. Canva Pro and Adobe Creative Cloud. The full suite. $60 a month so Brian could make memes. The Jeep. I dug into my email and pulled up the loan documents. My name was on every page right next to his. I pulled up the payment history. I had made 9 of the last 12 payments. The condo, property tax statements with my name, Choe dues, insurance, the water bill, the electric bill, all on autopay from my checking account. The deeper I went, the sicker I felt. It wasn't just generosity. I had built an entire ecosystem around him. Brian had a car because of me, a place to live because of me, a phone because of me, entertainment because of me, and in his mind, that still wasn't enough to earn a simple thank you, let alone respect. It wasn't enough to stop him from destroying my property the moment I said, no. I scrolled through old texts from my parents. All the subtle guilt trips. Don't make him feel like a burden, Lauren. You know how sensitive he is. But the truth was he was a burden. A heavy, ungrateful, destructive burden. And I had been carrying him for so long I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. At some point around 1 a.m., the anger stopped feeling hot and loud, cooled into something sharp, something useful. I picked up my phone. Step 1, the communication lines. I called the cell provider's 24-hour support line. I waited on hold for 20 minutes, listening to terrible jazz music, staring at the wall. When the rep finally answered, a woman with a tired voice named Sarah, I was ready. I need to make some changes to my plan, I said, my voice steady. I want to remove every line on this account except the primary line ending in 4599. Effective immediately. Sarah paused. Ma'am, that's 4 lines. If you remove them, those SIM cards will be deactivated instantly. They won't be able to make calls or use data. I understand, I said. Are you sure you don't want to just suspend them? Or transfer billing responsibility? No, I said. Cancel them. Completely. Okay, she said, typing in the background. And there are some device payments remaining on 2 of the lines. Charge the remaining balance to my card on file, I said. It was going to cost me about $800 to pay off the phones. But I didn't care. I wanted a clean break. Just get it done. Done, she said. Service has been terminated for those lines. Thank you, Sarah. I hung up. I imagined Brian lying in bed, scrolling TikTok, suddenly seeing the no service icon pop up in the corner of his screen. Step 2. The digital eviction. I logged into Netflix. I went to settings. Sign out of all devices. Then, change password. I made the new password a random string of 20 characters that I wrote down in a notebook. I did the same for Hulu, for HBO, for Spotify, for Amazon. I went into my Amazon household settings and removed Brian. I went into the saved payment methods and deleted the credit card he had gotten way too comfortable selecting. Step 3. The housing. This was the big one. This was the nuclear option. I opened my email and searched for Andrew Cole. He was a real estate attorney a friend from a networking group had recommended years ago for a difficult tenant situation. At the time, I had saved the contact thinking, hopefully I'll never need this. I went to his website. He had a urgent consultation form. I filled it out with shaking hands. Subject: eviction of family member, no lease. Message: my brother is living in a condo I own in Tempe. There is no lease agreement. He does not pay rent. He has destroyed my personal property and I fear for the safety of the unit. I need him out. What is the fastest way to do this legally? I hit send. I expected to hear back on Monday, maybe Tuesday. But 15 minutes later, my phone rang. The caller ID said, Andrew Cole Law. I answered. Hello, Lauren? This is Andrew. A deep, calm voice said, I saw your email come through. You said he destroyed property. He threw my laptop in a pool because I wouldn't give him $10,000. I said. The words sounded insane saying them out loud. Okay, Andrew said. His tone shifted from casual to clinical. That changes things. If there's no lease and he doesn't pay rent, he's technically a guest at will in Arizona, but given the duration, he might claim tenancy rights. However, with the destruction of property and the threat, we can move faster. How fast? I can draft a notice to quit tonight, he said. It's a demand for possession. Since there's no lease, we start with a 30-day notice, but because of the property damage, we can also file for an immediate restraining order if you feel threatened, which would effectively bar him from the residence if you live there. Wait, you don't live there, do you? No, I live in Phoenix. He's in Tempe. Okay, we serve the 30-day notice tomorrow. Certified mail and posted on the door. But here's the key, Lauren. You cannot accept a single penny from him from this moment forward. No partial rent. No utility reimbursement. If you take money, you establish a new rental period. Don't worry, I said, looking at the dead laptop. I don't want his money. I just want him out. I'll send the draft over in an hour. Sign it electronically, and my process server will handle the rest tomorrow morning. Do it, I said. When we hung up, I leaned back in my chair. My desktop clock read 2:15 a.m. I was exhausted. My eyes were burning. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel the crushing weight of obligation. I felt light. I looked at my list again. Every item I crossed off felt like cutting a wire on a bomb that had been strapped to my chest for a decade. Phone? Gone. TV? Gone. Amazon? Gone. My brother thought throwing my laptop in a pool was a punishment. He thought he was teaching me a lesson about loyalty. He had no idea that all he really did was flip a switch in my head. He freed me, and by the time the sun came up over the desert, the life he had built on my back was about to start collapsing, one quiet decision at a time. I must have passed out on the leather sofa in my office for a few hours, because the next thing I remember is my alarm going off at 6 a.m. My neck was stiff, and there was a moment of confusion when I woke up, that split second where you forget what happened. Then I saw the blank space on my desk where my laptop usually sat, and it all came rushing back. The splash, the smirk, the walk to the car. I reached for my phone. It was vibrating against the coffee table like an angry hornet. The screen was lit up with missed calls and messages. The same name over and over again. Brian. There were 14 missed calls. 22 text messages. I unlocked the phone and scrolled through them. The progression was fascinating. 2:30 a.m. Yo. My Netflix isn't working. Did you change the password? 2:35 a.m. Hulu is out too. What's going on? 3 a.m., Lauren, pick up. My phone says SOS only. I can't make calls. I'm on Wi-Fi right now. Did you forget to pay the bill? 3:15 a.m. Lauren? 4 a.m. This isn't funny. I have calls to make tomorrow morning. Turn it back on. 5:45 a.m. Are you serious right now? You cut my phone off? Over a laptop? 5:50 a.m. You're being a psycho. Turn it back on or I'm telling Dad. I watched the notifications stack up. I didn't open a single one. I didn't type a reply. I just let them sit there, little digital monuments to his panic. A few minutes later, my mom's name popped up, then my dad's. I let those ring out too. It was almost funny in a sick way. For years, I had been the one terrified of letting them down. I answered every call on the first ring. I jumped whenever they needed something. And now, the moment I stopped paying for everything, they were the ones panicking. I stood up, stretched, and walked to the kitchen. I made coffee, strong, black coffee. I stood by the window watching the sunrise paint the sky that bright, harsh Arizona blue. I wasn't done yet. I took my mug back to the desk and pulled up the auto loan account for the Jeep. This was the one that made my stomach tighten. A car isn't just a Netflix subscription. It's a lifeline. Taking a man's car is an act of war. I looked at the balance, the payment history, the 3 delinquency notices from last year that I had quietly covered so the bank wouldn't take the car, saving Brian the embarrassment. All of it stared back at me. I dialed the lender. It was a national bank, so their support was open. I went through the security questions: mother's maiden name, last 4 of social. "How can I help you today, Ms. Mitchell?" the agent asked. "I'm a co-borrower on a vehicle loan," I said. "Account ending in 7782. A 2020 Jeep Cherokee." "Yes, I see it here. Payments are current." "They are current because I pay them," I said. "But the other party, the primary driver, has possession of the vehicle and is refusing to make payments. I am no longer willing to cover his debt. I want to discuss voluntary repossession." There was a long pause on the line. "I see. You want to surrender the vehicle?" "I don't have the vehicle," I said clearly. "It is at a location I do not reside at. But my name is on the title. I want to authorize the bank to collect its collateral." "Okay," the agent said, her voice careful. "If you do this, it will impact your credit score as a repossession." "I have an 800 credit score," I said. "I can take the hit." "He can't." "Very well. I need the location of the vehicle." "It's at." I gave the address of the condo in Tempe. "It's usually parked in spot 4B. It's a gated complex, but the gate code is number 1988. We can have a recovery agent dispatched. Usually takes 24 to 48 hours, but if it's accessible." "It's accessible," I said. "Okay. I'm processing the request." I authorized it electronically while she was still on the line. Hanging up, I pictured Brian waking up late, shuffling outside in his slides, hungover, expecting to drive to Starbucks, and seeing an empty parking spot where his precious Jeep used to be. I took a sip of coffee. I felt balanced, but the phone kept buzzing. "Brian, my phone is completely dead. I'm using the neighbor's Wi-Fi. What did you do? You better fix this." "Brian, did you cancel my line? Are you serious right now?" I set the phone face down and opened my credit card account instead. If canceling the phone plan and going after the car were cutting the cords, this was digging up the roots. I went through my statements line by line, highlighting anything I couldn't immediately recognize. I had given Brian emergency use access to this card years ago for business supplies. I saw the charges. Starbucks, $12.50. GameStop, $69.99. Uber Eats, $45. Sushi. FanDuel, $100. Gambling. Local bar, $80. Little charges, but put together over 6 months, the total was just over $2,300. He was eating sushi and gambling on sports while I was working weekends to pay his rent. I called the card company immediately. "I need to report unauthorized use," I told the fraud department. I have a family member who was an authorized user for business expenses, but I see dozens of personal charges here that I did not approve. We can dispute those charges, the agent said, and we should cancel this card number immediately and issue you a new one. Do it, I said, and remove him as an authorized user. Permanently. Consider it done. The card he has will be declined immediately. Thank you. As the fraud claim was filed, more messages came in over Wi-Fi. Brian, why is my card getting declined? My Uber app says payment failed. You're actually insane. You know that, Dad? Call me now, Lauren. We need to talk about this behavior. I finished with the bank. The agent told me the investigation could take some time, but the charges would be provisionally reversed. When we hung up, I finally opened my email. Sitting at the top of my inbox was a message from Andrew Cole with the subject line, "Notice to vacate draft attached." I clicked it. The letter was short, formal, and painfully clear. It stated that Brian Mitchell was occupying the property without a lease, that his permission to stay was revoked effective immediately, and that he had 30 days to vacate the premises before formal eviction proceedings would begin. It referenced the address, my ownership, and the remedies I could pursue if he refused. All I had to do was sign it. I added my e-signature, took a breath, and forwarded it to Brian's email with a simple subject line. Read this. No explanation. No apology. Then, per Andrew's instructions, I submitted the document to be sent by certified mail to the condo address. Somewhere between scheduling the mailing and closing the tab, my phone started vibrating nonstop again. Brian's texts had shifted from confusion to rage. Brian, you're kicking me out? You can't do this. That place is mine too. Dad said it was for both of us. Brian, you are literally ruining my life over a stupid laptop. I set the phone down and looked at the list I'd made the night before. Most of the items were now crossed out. Phone line? Gone. Streaming? Locked. Credit card? Cut. Jeep? On its way to a tow yard. Free housing? Countdown started. Outside, the sun was fully up now. The world looked sharp and bright. My brother thought he had punished me when he threw my laptop into the pool. He thought he could bully me into submission like he always did. He had no idea that the real punishment was waking up to a world where I finally stopped pretending I owed him everything. And by the time the tow truck rolled up to that condo in Tempe, it was too late for him to pretend nothing had changed. It didn't take long for the fallout to show up at my front door. Around 10:30 that morning, just as I was starting to answer emails from clients, using my backup desktop and apologizing for the delay, someone started pounding on my townhouse door. And I don't mean knocking, I mean pounding, the kind of heavy, rhythmic thudding that rattles the frames of the pictures on the wall. Bam, bam, bam. My heart jumped into my throat. Even though I knew this was coming, the physical reality of it is different than the plan in your head. Lauren, open the damn door. It was Brian. His voice sliced right through the wood. It was deep, hoarse, and shaking with rage. I stood up from my desk. My hands were trembling, but I clenched them into fists to stop it. I wasn't going to hide. I picked up my phone, opened the camera app, and switched it to video. I walked to the entryway, but I didn't unlock the deadbolt. I stepped up to the peephole. What I saw on the other side made my stomach turn. Brian looked like a wreck. He was wearing gray sweatpants that looked stained and an oversized hoodie, despite the heat. His hair was a mess, sticking up in tufts. He wasn't wearing his expensive sunglasses now. His eyes were wild, red-rimmed, darting around like a caged animal. He paced back and forth on my small front porch, kicking at my welcome mat. Bam! He hit the door with the flat of his palm again. They took it, he screamed. Some tow truck just showed up and hooked it up. My Jeep, Lauren. They took my car. He put his face close to the door. I know you're in there. I saw your car. Open up and fix this. Cleared my throat. I wanted my voice to be strong, recorded clearly on the video. It's not your Jeep, Brian, I said loud enough for him to hear through the door. It's the bank's, and my name is on the loan. Remember? There was a beat of silence on the other side. Then he laughed. It was a sharp, mean sound. Oh, so that's how it is? You cancel my phone, you cut off my card, you get my car stolen, and now you're what? Evicting me? He kicked the bottom of the door. The wood splintered slightly. You're doing all of this over a laptop? A computer? Are you insane? Leave, Brian, I said. Go home. I can't go home, he roared. You just served me an eviction notice, and I can't drive there because you took my car. You stranded me here. He was getting louder. Neighbors were starting to come out. I saw Mrs. Higgins across the street peek through her blinds. You think you're better than everyone just because you know how to pay bills? He shouted. You think money makes you the boss of this family? That one almost made me laugh. Almost. I'm warning you, Brian, I said. If you hit my door one more time, I'm calling the police. Call them, he challenged. Call them. Tell them you stole your brother's car. Tell them you're a vindictive little. He hurled a string of insults at me, words he'd probably been holding back for years. He called me heartless. He called me a control freak. He called me a greedy bitch who forgot where she came from. Then he threw his shoulder against the door. The deadbolt held, but the frame groaned. That was it. I hit the side button on my phone and dialed 911. With the video recording still running in the background, I stepped back into the hallway. 911. What is your emergency? My name is Lauren Mitchell, I said, my voice shaking but clear. My brother is at my front door. He is becoming violent. He is banging on the door and trying to break it down. He has already destroyed my property yesterday, and I am afraid for my safety. Is he armed? I don't know. He's very aggressive. What is your address? I gave it to them. Stay inside. Keep the door locked. Officers are on the way. The pounding continued for another 3 minutes. Then suddenly it stopped. I crept back to the peephole. Brian was sitting on my front step, head in his hands, rocking back and forth. He looked less like a monster and more like a toddler who had tired himself out. But I wasn't falling for it. Not this time. 5 minutes later, a squad car pulled up to the curb. I watched as a female officer, Officer Hayes, her badge said later, stepped out. She was tall, calm, and walked with an authority that immediately changed the energy on the porch. She approached Brian. He jumped up, pointing at my house, waving his arms. I could hear him yelling through the glass. She stole my car. She's crazy. This is a family dispute. Officer Hayes held up a hand. She didn't yell. She just spoke firmly. She separated him from the door, moving him down the sidewalk. Then she knocked on my door. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened it. Officer Hayes looked at me. She looked tired but kind. Ma'am, are you okay? I am, I said. He's my brother. Yesterday he destroyed my laptop because I refused to lend him money. Today, I legally repossessed the car I co-signed for and cut off his financial support. He came here to attack me. I showed her the video of him kicking the door. I showed her the texts. She nodded slowly. Legally, she said, glancing back at Brian, who was sulking by the police car. You've done everything right. It's civil regarding the property, but his behavior here is disturbance of the peace and potential trespassing. I just want him to leave, I said, and I want him to know he can't come back. She nodded. She walked back to Brian. I stood in the doorway and watched. I saw Brian's face go from angry to shocked to humiliated. He pointed at me one last time. You're ruining my life, Lauren. You're actually ruining my life over some stupid electronics. I didn't step onto the porch. I didn't shout back. I just looked at him and said, very calmly, no, Brian, I'm just done funding it. Officer Hayes told him he had to leave the property. Since he didn't have a car, she asked if he had a ride. He had to call a friend. I watched him stand on the curb, waiting for his buddy to pick him up in a beat-up Honda Civic. He looked small. He looked defeated. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to run out and fix it. I didn't feel the need to hand him $20 for a cab. I closed the door. I locked the deadbolt, and I went back to work. You'd think the police showing up would be the end of it. But if you come from a family like mine, you know that's just the intermission. After the police car pulled away, my phone lit up again. This time it was my dad. I stared at the screen. I knew exactly what this conversation was going to be. It was the flying monkey phase, where the narcissist sends in their enablers to do the dirty work. I answered more out of curiosity than anything. "Hello. What on earth are you thinking?" Dad snapped. He didn't even say hello. "Your brother just called me. He is hysterical. He says you called the cops on him? You took his car? You're evicting him. He came to my house and tried to kick my door down." "Dad?" I said. "Yes, I called the police." "He was upset," Dad yelled. "He's under a lot of stress. You provoked him by stealing his car." "I didn't steal it," I said, my voice hardening. "The bank repossessed it because he hasn't paid for it in a year. I stopped covering for him." "Lauren," Dad's voice dropped to that disappointed growl I used to fear. "That car was necessary for his work. You have sabotaged his livelihood. Over what? A laptop? I told you I'd look at it." "It's not about the laptop, Dad," I finally shouted back. "It's about $2,300 in credit card fraud. He's been using my card to gamble and order sushi while I work 60 hours a week. He's been living in my condo for 3 years for free. He owes me thousands of dollars." There was a long pause on the line. I could hear him breathing. "She told us you were exaggerating," he finally said. "He said you offered the card. He said you changed your mind and now you're punishing him." I actually laughed. A short, humorless sound. "Of course he did. I told him about the fraud claim. I told him about the bank statements. I told him about the specific charges I found. I laid it all out plainly. No sugarcoating. No apologizing." On the other end, I could hear my mom crying in the background. She must have been listening on speaker. "Lauren, honey," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's your brother. He made a mistake. He doesn't understand money the way you do. He's an artist. You know how he is." "Yeah," I said, my voice flat. "I know exactly how he is. And you do too. You just don't want to admit it." "He says he's going to be on the street," Mom sobbed. "He says you're throwing him away. Is that really what you want? To see your brother homeless?" I closed my eyes. This was the weapon they always used. Guilt. The idea that if I didn't set myself on fire to keep Brian warm, I was the bad guy. "I want him to be responsible for himself for once," I said. "I'm not throwing him away. I'm just not cushioning the landing anymore. He's 36 years old. Mom, he's a grown man." "You've changed," Dad said coldly. "That money has gone to your head. You think you can just push people around." "No, Dad," I said. "I think I can stop being pushed around." I hung up. Then came Aunt Linda. She started texting me long paragraphs. "Aunt Linda, Lauren, I heard what happened. Money comes and goes, but family is forever. Think about who shared a bedroom wall with you when you were kids. Think about Christmas. Don't let a dispute over a computer destroy your family." "Aunt Linda, Brian is devastated. He feels betrayed. Please just call him and work this out." I didn't reply. A few hours later, Brian made a public post on Facebook. It was a long, rambling status update about greedy family members who steal cars and homes and weaponize money to control people. He didn't tag me, but he made sure to mention the rich sister who forgot where she came from. Mutual friends started chiming in, some blindly defending him. "Stay strong, bro. Money is the root of all evil." And some messaging me privately to ask if everything was okay because they knew Brian was full of it. I didn't jump into the comments. I didn't write a big call-out thread with screenshots and proof, even though I easily could have. I had the receipts. I had the video of him kicking my door. I reported the post for harassment. I blocked a couple of the loudest idiots, and I went back to my work. Because here's what I finally understood. Anyone who wanted to see me as the villain was going to do it, no matter how many facts I handed them. The people who actually knew me, my real friends, my colleagues, didn't need a slideshow to get the picture. That afternoon, sitting at my desk with my phone face down and my email open, I realized something else. 2. For the first time in my life, the loudest, most dramatic person in the family wasn't writing the story. I was, and as messy and painful as that day was, part of me was almost relieved. Because once you let go of being the good daughter whose job is to keep everyone comfortable, there's a strange, terrifying freedom in finally letting people be uncomfortable with the truth. I looked at the empty spot on my desk where my old laptop used to be. The silence in the house wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. 18 months later, the email from the court showed up on my phone like any other notification. It didn't have a red flag or a siren attached to it. It was just a short, dry, automated message from the Maricopa County Clerk of Superior Court. It stated that Brian Mitchell had successfully completed his probation. His community service hours were logged and verified. His restitution payments were up to date. Legally, the whole mess was closed. Emotionally, that was a much longer road. By the time that email arrived, my life looked very different from the day my brother threw my laptop into the pool. Obviously, I had upgraded my systems. I bought a new MacBook Pro, paid for in cash, insured to the hilt. I backed everything up in 3 different places: the cloud, a physical drive in my office, and a physical drive in a fireproof safe. I tightened my client contracts. I hired an assistant. My business had grown. It wasn't a flashy, overnight viral success story. It was better. It was steady. It was solid. The energy I used to spend worrying about whether Brian had paid his phone bill, or if Mom was going to call me crying about his rent, was now poured directly into my work. I had more referrals. I had better boundaries. I had a level of focus I hadn't known I was missing when half my mental bandwidth was being consumed by putting out Brian-shaped fires. But the biggest change wasn't in my bank account. It was in the silence. For the first 6 months after the incident, as my family referred to it, we didn't speak. I didn't go to Thanksgiving. I didn't go to Christmas. That was the hardest part. I remember sitting in my townhouse on Christmas Eve, drinking wine and watching a movie alone, knowing that 20 minutes away, my parents were sitting around a tree. I knew Aunt Linda was probably there, making passive-aggressive comments about how some people think they're too good for family. I knew there was an empty chair at the table. It hurt. I'm not going to lie to you and say I felt like a superhero every day. There were nights I cried. There were times I picked up the phone to call my mom, just to hear her voice, just to fix it. But then I would look at my bank statement. I would look at the peace in my home, and I would put the phone down. I had built something I never thought I'd have with my parents. Honest distance. Eventually, the ice started to thaw. But it wasn't because I caved. It was because they realized I wasn't coming back on their terms. I started seeing my mom for coffee once every month or 2. Just the 2 of us. No Brian. No Dad. The first few times were excruciatingly awkward. We talked about the weather. We talked about her garden. We talked about the new neighbors. We danced around the elephant in the room like it was a landmine. But about 8 months in, during a lunch at a Panera Bread, Mom finally cracked. She looked tired. Her hands were shaking slightly as she held her iced tea. "I saw him yesterday," she said quietly. I didn't have to ask who. "How is he?" I asked. My voice was neutral. I had practiced this tone in therapy. Not cold, just detached. "He's tired," Mom said. She looked down at the table. "He's working at a warehouse fulfillment center, packing boxes. It's hard work. He stands for 10 hours a day." I took a bite of my salad. "That sounds like a steady job," I said. Mom looked up at me, her eyes wet. "I drove by the condo the other day. I know you rented it out to a nice couple. It looks good. You planted new flowers." "I did," I said. "They pay on the 1st of the month every month. They've never missed a payment." Mom sighed, a long, shuddering breath. "I was so angry with you, Lauren. When the police took him away, when he had to go to court, I thought you were being cruel. I thought you were trying to destroy him." I put my fork down. I know you did. But. She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. Last week, Brian came over for dinner. He bought the groceries. He bought the steaks with his own paycheck. And he cooked them. He didn't ask for gas money. He didn't ask for a loan. He just cooked dinner. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw my mother, not the enabler. He's never done that, she whispered. In 36 years, he has never bought dinner. And I realized, if you hadn't stopped us, if you hadn't forced him to hit the bottom, he never would have. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. It broke my heart watching him do community service. Seeing my son picking up trash on the highway in an orange vest. It killed me. But I think you saved him. I didn't pull my hand away. I didn't do it to save him, Mom. I did it to save myself. But I'm glad he's stepping up. My dad came around slower. He was like a big ship trying to turn in a narrow canal. He never gave me a dramatic apology. He never said, I was wrong to tell you that you owed him your money. That's not who my dad is. But he stopped asking me to fix things. When I told him I wasn't coming to the big family reunion because I wasn't ready to see Brian yet, he didn't guilt-trip me. He didn't say, you're tearing this family apart. He just nodded and said, I understand, Lauren. We'll miss you. It was new. It was fragile. But it was real respect. As for Brian, he became more of a rumor than a presence in my life. I heard things through the grapevine. I heard he had moved back in with my parents for 3 months, but Dad had charged him rent, actual rent, and made him sign a contract. I heard he had moved into a small apartment with a roommate near the industrial park where he worked. I heard he had sold his expensive camera equipment to pay off his court fines. I heard he had stopped telling people he was an entrepreneur, about to blow up, and started saying things like, I'm just trying to keep my head above water. I didn't stalk his social media. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't drive by his apartment. When his restitution checks arrived in my mailbox, $150 a month, court-ordered, to pay back the credit card fraud, I deposited them. I didn't send a thank you text. I didn't gloat. I just put the money against the principal of my mortgage. I had made my choices. He was living with his. I thought that was how it would stay. Parallel lines, running in the same direction but never touching. But life has a funny way of circling back when you least expect it. The first time I actually saw him again, it wasn't at a funeral. It wasn't at a wedding. It wasn't at some dramatic family intervention. It was in the most ordinary place possible. A grocery store on a Tuesday evening. I was pushing my cart down the frozen foods aisle, trying to decide between 2 brands of dumplings. I was tired. I had just closed a massive deal with a healthcare client, and my brain was fried. I was wearing yoga pants and a messy bun, listening to a business podcast in one earbud. I reached for a bag of pot stickers. Those ones are better, a voice said. The wrapper doesn't get soggy. I froze. I knew that voice. It was deeper, raspy, but I knew it. I turned slowly. There he was, Brian. He was stocking the freezer case. He was wearing a dark blue polo shirt with a grocery store logo on the chest, a name tag clipped to the collar, and heavy work boots. He looked different. The Brian I remembered was always styled. Even when he was broke, he spent hours on his hair. He wore trendy streetwear he couldn't afford. He carried himself with this unearned swagger, like he was doing the world a favor by existing. This man looked older. Not in a bad way, just less glossy. There were faint lines around his eyes I didn't remember. His hair was cut short, practical. He had a few gray hairs at his temples. He wasn't wearing the Oakleys. He looked tired. But it was the kind of tired that comes from working, not the kind of tired that comes from partying. For a second, neither of us said anything. The hum of the freezer units filled the silence. We just stared at each other. 2 siblings who had shared a childhood, shared secrets, shared a war, and then became strangers. He swallowed hard. He was holding a box of frozen pizzas. His hands looked rougher. I know I'm not supposed to bother you, he said, glancing down at his boots. The order expired, but I know you don't want to see me. The restraining order had expired with his probation 6 months ago. He technically wasn't breaking any rules by standing there. I could have walked away. Part of me considered it. Just turn my cart around and leave. Pretend he was a ghost. But another part of me, the part that had spent 18 months rebuilding my self-worth, was curious. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I wasn't responsible for him anymore. "You can talk," I said carefully. "I'm not promising anything, but you can talk." He nodded. He put the box of pizzas into the case, lining them up perfectly. It was a small detail, but the old Brian would have just shoved them in. "I'm sorry," he said. It wasn't a speech. There was no drama in it. No performance. "No, but you have to understand." His voice shook on the word. "For the laptop," he said. "For the money. For the way I used you." He looked me in the eye. It was terrifyingly direct. "I told myself I deserved your help because we were family," he said. "Because you were doing better and I was struggling. I made up all these stories in my head about you being selfish so I didn't have to look at what I was doing. I convinced myself I was the victim." He took a breath. "But I know now. I know I stole from you. I know I scared you. I know I made you feel like you didn't matter unless you were fixing my life." I felt something twist in my chest at that. It was a mix of anger, grief, and a weird, unexpected hint of relief. I wasn't interested in making it easier for him. I wasn't going to say, "It's okay," because it wasn't okay. "You did," I said quietly. "You did all of that." He nodded again. He didn't flinch. "I know. Probation sucked." He admitted with a humorless little laugh. "Community service sucked. Having to pay back every dollar. That really sucked. But the worst part wasn't the punishment." "What was it?" I asked. "The worst part was realizing that I was never as helpless as I told everyone I was," he said. "I just didn't want to grow up, because it was easier to let you be the adult for both of us." We stood there in the frozen aisle. A woman pushed her cart past us, oblivious to the fact that 2 lives were being recalibrated right next to the ice cream. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he added quickly. "I mean, if you ever do, that would be amazing. But I get it if you can't. I needed you to know that I know. I'm working here full-time. I'm up for a shift manager spot next month. It's not crypto money, but it's mine." I looked at his name tag. Brian. Team member. I thought about the list I had made that night. The list of everything I provided. "I appreciate you saying that," I said finally. "And I'm glad you're taking responsibility. I really am." "Does that mean?" He stopped himself. The hope flared in his eyes for a second. Then he tamped it down. "It means I'm not going to pretend none of it happened." I cut in gently but firmly. "It means I'm not going to go back to how things were. I'm not your bank, Brian. I'm not your safety net." I stepped a little closer. "If we ever have any kind of relationship again," I said, "it's going to be small, and it's going to be slow, and it's going to be on very clear terms. I'm not lending you money. I'm not signing for a car. I'm not bailing you out. And I get to walk away the second it feels like you're slipping into old patterns. No guilt trips. No speeches about family loyalty." He flinched a little at that, but he didn't get angry. He didn't explode. He nodded. "That's fair," he whispered. "That's more than fair." He looked at the bag of dumplings in my hand. "Take the other brand," he said, pointing to the shelf. "Seriously, they're way better." I looked at the dumplings. Then I looked at him. "Thanks for the tip," I said. I put the bag in my cart. We didn't hug. There was no swelling orchestral music. There was no instant healing of 3 decades of dysfunction. "I gotta get back to work," he said. "Manager watches the cameras." "Okay," I said. "Take care of yourself, Brian." "You too, Lo," he said. He turned back to his cart of frozen goods. I pushed mine toward the checkout. As I walked away, I realized something important. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defining myself by who I was to him. I wasn't the savior. I wasn't the ATM. I wasn't the villain in his sob story. I was just Lauren. I paid for my groceries with my own card. I walked out to my car. A car I owned. A car no one could take from me. Later that week, I called my dad. I saw Brian, I said. Oh. Dad's voice was cautious. How did it go? It was fine, I said. He recommended some dumplings. That's good, Dad said. That's a start. Yeah, I said. It is. I didn't offer to invite Brian to dinner. I didn't offer to buy him a gift. I just let it be what it was. A brief, honest moment between two adults who were finally living in the same reality. When I told my therapist about it, she smiled, that knowing, calm smile that usually costs me $150 an hour. You did the hardest thing most people ever have to do, she said. You chose yourself without needing to destroy anyone else to do it. You let him fall, and because he fell, he learned how to stand. And that, more than any court order, more than any repossessed Jeep, was the real victory. It wasn't watching Brian suffer. It wasn't getting the last word. It was refusing to hand my life back to the same dynamic that almost swallowed me whole. If there is anything I have learned from the laptop in the pool, the eviction, and the silence, it's that family loyalty without boundaries isn't love. The self-erasure. Saying yes until you have nothing left doesn't make you a good daughter or a good sister. It just makes you empty. The people who truly love you don't ask you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. They learn how to build their own fire, even if it takes them longer, even if they fail a few times. So, if you've got your own Brian in your life, someone who calls manipulation love and calls theft borrowing, this is what I want you to hear. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect the life you worked for, even if the people who benefited from your silence call you cruel for finally speaking up. Because at the end of the day, the real punishment isn't losing access to someone else's money or car or couch. The real punishment is waking up one morning and realizing the person you've been draining dry isn't willing to bleed for you anymore. And if you're the one who's been bleeding, you don't owe anyone an apology for finally deciding to heal. This story wasn't just about a laptop or a loan. It was about the dangerous trap of financial enmeshment. In so many families, especially here in the US, we are taught that family helps family no matter the cost. But we rarely talk about the difference between helping and enabling. When I paid for Brian's mistakes, I wasn't helping him. I was robbing him of the consequences he needed to grow. I was paying for him to remain a child. And in the process, I was disrespecting my own labor and my own peace. The biggest lesson here is that boundaries are not punishments. Boundaries are the only way to sustain a healthy relationship. You cannot build a connection with someone who doesn't respect your no. By cutting Brian off, I gave him the dignity of hitting rock bottom and building his own way up, and I gave myself the dignity of living a life that was truly mine. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to cut off a family member to save yourself? Or maybe you've been the one who needed a wake-up call. Drop a comment below with your story, or just type good if you agree that boundaries are a form of love. I read every single comment, and I really want to know I'm not alone in this. Thanks for listening.